Great. Thank you, Mohammed, for that introduction. And it's a real pleasure and honor to be here, speaking here today, and also to be a recipient of the PS11 medal. So I'm going to talk about using AI to accelerate scientific discovery. And when we started DeepMind back in 2010, we started with a very ambitious mission that we're still driving forwards on today. So we wanted to try and solve intelligence, and by that I mean fundamentally understand the nature of intelligence and recreate it artificially, and then use that technology to advance science for the benefit of humanity. So the type of AI systems that we build at DeepMind and specialize in are called learning systems. And I just want to quickly explain what we mean by that. So the heart of learning systems is basically this diagram I'm going to explain. So if you imagine on the left-hand side here, the agent system or the AI system, so sometimes we call them agents, finds itself in some kind of environment on the right-hand side. And that environment could be the real world, in which case the agent's probably a robot, a physical robot. But it could also be a virtual world, like a simulation or a game, in which case the agent will be a virtual agent, like an avatar. And the idea of the agent, the first job of the agent system is it gets observations about the environment through its sensory apparatus. Usually that's vision, but it can also be other modalities like sound or touch. And those observations come in as a data input stream. And the first job of the agent is to make a model of the environment, a predictive model of the environment that it can use. The second part of the agent system is that the designers of that agent system can provide it with a goal that it's supposed to achieve in the environment. And the agent has to decide what action to take from the set of actions available to it at that moment in time that will best get it incrementally towards its goal. And it can do a certain amount of planning based on the model it has of the environment. So, if I do action A, it will make this predicted change to the environment, and is that good or not good for me getting towards my goal? So the two parts of machine learning that we use to do these two aspects is deep learning or deep neural networks to build the model of the environment from experience or data. And we use a technique called reinforcement learning that models how to learn from trial and error how to achieve a goal. And all the systems that we build are some combination of these two ideas. And we call them deep reinforcement learning systems. And the exciting thing about them is that potentially they can discover or find out new knowledge for themselves through first principles, through this sort of process of learning from feedback and a guided search, and actually find new knowledge that the designers of this system did not know how to do. So we've been fortunate over the last decade to have a few quite big landmark breakthroughs in research in AI for games. And we started off with games because it's the classic sort of platform for AI research and has been for many decades. And we had sort of several landmark results on the way during our research. So firstly, in 2014, we built the first sort of end-to-end system on Atari games, so quite simple games like Space Invaders. But this was the first system that could actually learn how to play these games and maximize the scores in these games directly just from the pixels on the screen. So not being told any of the rules or any of the ways of how to get points, had to learn all of that for itself from first principles. We then took that system and expanded it, probably most well known for AlphaGo, which was our program that beat the world champion at the classic board game, complex board game of Go. And it was able to do this by playing tens of millions of games against itself, learning starting from random, and actually building up its own knowledge about how to play Go. So in fact, it discovered, not only did it beat the world champion, it also discovered new motifs, new strategies in Go that even though we as humans have been playing it for several thousand years now, had not thought about before. We then generalized this with AlphaZero in 2017 to play any two-player game, including chess, better than the specialized chess computers that are out there, like Stockfish. And then finally, in 2019, we built AlphaStar to play the most complex computer game, real-time strategy computer game called StarCraft 2. So in 5 short years, we went from simple Atari games to being able to master to grandmaster level the most complex computer games out there. Now, obviously, the idea of all of this research was not to just play games. The idea was to develop these general AI systems that could then be applied to real-world complex real-world problems, both in industry, but especially in my particular passion in science itself. So what do we look for a problem that might be suitable for these types of techniques that we develop, these learning techniques that we develop through researching on games? Well, here are three kind of principles or properties that we look for any problem. First of all, we really like problems that can be expressed as massive combinatorial search spaces. So you might sort of say, well, why is that? Because obviously they're very difficult spaces to deal with. And actually we like those types of problems because it means naive brute force approaches won't work. They won't be tractable in those types of massive search spaces. So one has to do something smarter. The second thing we look for is being able to specify a clear objective function or metric that you can optimize against, the system against, incrementally improve against. So obviously in games, this is pretty easy because there's win conditions and often there's scores in games. But actually, surprisingly in science, there are many ways you can turn those problems into clear objective functions. And then finally, we look for problems that also have either a lot of data to learn from, and ideally but could be or, an accurate and efficient simulator with which to generate synthetic data, ideally from the same type of distribution that the real data comes from. Now, when we looked for problems of this type, one that has been on my mind for maybe more than 20 years since my undergrad, I've had my eye on the protein folding problem as potentially a perfect problem suited to AI techniques, especially these kind of learning techniques. And some people in the earlier session obviously talked about protein folding, but just to remind everyone, the problem is going from an amino acid sequence, a kind of 1D sequence of letters, directly to the 3D structure of the protein. So as we all know, proteins are essential to all life, and their function partly depends on this 3D structure. But determining the structure experimentally often takes years of painstaking work. The rule of thumb, I was told, was it can take one PhD student their entire PhD to potentially find the structure for one protein. And Christian Amfinsen and others famously in the sort of 70s conjectured that this should be possible to go to sort of find the 3D structure of protein directly from the amino acid sequence. And this conjecture sparked off what could be thought of as a 50-year-old grand challenge in biology to find out if this is possible. Now, obviously, over that 50 years, we found this a very tough problem. And one of the reasons is that Leventhal, one of the contemporaries of Amfinsen, did a back-of-the-envelope calculation that for an average-sized protein, there are probably around 10 to the 300, some massive amount of possible conformations or shapes that protein can take. So clearly, naively or exhausting sampling all of these possible conformations would be totally intractable. But somehow, and this is the paradox, is that in nature, these proteins fold up in our bodies in the order of milliseconds or seconds, and spontaneously do that and seemingly effortlessly. So there must be some sort of a gradient that physics is following or biophysics is following. And the question is, can this protein structure prediction problem be solved purely computation? So another reasons we tackled this problem is there's this fantastic biannual competition called CASP, which you can think of as the sort of Olympics of protein folding. And it takes place every 2 years, been running since 1994, and it's considered to be the kind of gold standard benchmark in protein folding. And you can see over the progress over the last decade before we entered the field that there hadn't been much progress on the hardest problem of the free modeling category when there are no homologs to learn from. And there hadn't been much progress at all over that time. And then in 2016, we started the AlphaFold project. And in 2018, we entered the competition for the first time, the CAS13, the 13th edition, and we won it by a huge margin, and we improved the winning scores by 50%. And then we re-architected the whole system, having learned what were things from the first system for AlphaFold 2, which we entered in the 14th edition of the competition in 2020, where we reached what we were always aiming for, which was atomic accuracy with our predictions. And you can see from the error bars here, that's AlphaFold 2, the amount of the median error it made on the test 90 or so proteins, structures that we were supposed to predict. And AlphaFold on average got an error of less than 1 angstrom, so within an atom, width of an atom. So around 3 times more accurate than the next best systems in the competition. So this led the organizers to declare the structure prediction problem to be essentially solved. And when they set out with this competition 30 years ago, the 1 angstrom threshold was always what they were looking for the computational system to be competitive or comparable to experimental data. So this is just some examples of some of the predictions from the competition. When we first got this back in the summer of 2020, you can imagine we were pretty astounded by the accuracy of these things and really pleased, and including, you can see here on the left-hand side, even some of the side chains of this COVID protein were pretty accurate. I haven't got time to go into the architecture of AlphaFold 2, but suffice to say it was one of the most complex systems we've ever built, and we built quite a lot of complex systems at DeepMind, and there are about 32 component algorithms that went into making AlphaFold 2 and a whole host of innovative ideas. And one of the key things was actually combining with the learning system some physical constraints that were learned from physics and from evolutionary constraints that were built into the system to constrain the learning without impacting what AlphaFold could learn about proteins and protein structures. Now, once we had that system, we had this fantastically accurate system, we were sort of starting to think about how could we provide this system to benefit the biology research community. And generally what you do with these systems is you put up a server and people submit their amino acid sequences of the proteins they're interested in, and maybe you sort of number crunch it, and a few months later you give them back a structure. But because this system not only was super accurate, it was also very, very fast, so the order of minutes to fold an average protein on a single GPU machine, we realized that over the Christmas of 2020, that we could actually just fold the entire human proteome in one go in a matter of a couple of weeks. So that's what we did over the Christmas, and we actually did all the entire human proteome, so all 20,000 proteins expressed by the human genome. And so what that means is that at the time, back in 2020, around 17% of the proteins in the human body were known experimentally, so coverage was at 17%. And we more than doubled that overnight to 36% with very high accuracy, sub-angstrom accuracy predictions, and 58% of the proteins were predicted to what we would determine as high accuracy, which means the backbone was pretty reliably predicted. And then the rest, actually, it turns out researchers have looked at those ones that AlphaFold doesn't predict so well, and it turns out that they could be mostly unstructured in isolation. So perhaps that's in the biology itself, that in isolation, they're actually unstructured regions. So this is the most complete and accurate picture so far of the human proteome, and we published both the methods and open source all the code, as well as the human proteome in summer last year. We then went a bit further and we teamed up with our colleagues at EMBL EBI, just up the road from us in Cambridge. And we decided to expand all the data that we produced and create an open source database hosted by EBI with free and unrestricted access to all of these structures for any use. And then just a few weeks ago, over the last year, we've been folding 200 million proteins. So pretty much all proteins known to science. So every plant, animal, bacteria known to science, cataloged to science, we folded every single protein, and now all 200 million structures are in the database. And we did this to try and maximize the scientific benefit and impact to both the research community and hopefully downstream to humanity at large. Of course, just as a brief note on ethics and safety, before we did this, we consulted with around 30 biosecurity and bioethics experts to just check that it was safe to release such a big data set. And on the right-hand side here, you can see the database in action and all the tools that the wonderful folks at the EBI built into it. So it's now become a standard tool in the canon for biology researchers. And there's been an amazing, just within a year, an amazing number of use cases, diverse use cases of AlphaFold helping to accelerate progress on a range of important problems, from tackling plastic pollution to antibiotic resistance, fundamental structural biology. For example, I think earlier on, Professor Hell was showing the nuclear pore complex, and there was a special edition in Science just a few weeks ago with this. Finally, the structure of the nuclear pore complex was resolved using experimental data in addition to AlphaFold predictions, and then being complementary with each other. Crop sustainability, malaria vaccines, and also by industry for drug discovery. So the impact has been more than we could have imagined. There's over 500,000 researchers have used the database and used the structures. We think that's pretty much every biologist in the world. And we've had a nice number of accolades as well about AlphaFold. And I think this is just the beginning of the acceleration of science. Mohammed mentioned one of our papers on pure mathematics. And actually, last year was a real watershed moment for us in applying AI to many fields in science. So, of course, protein folding is our big headline one, but we've had big impact on applying AI in quantum chemistry, pure mathematics, in fusion, and weather prediction, just to name a few. So I think over the next decade, we're going to see a huge proliferation of this. And just to finish then, lots of people, I was fascinated by the first session on astrophysics, and I've always thought of AI as a bit like analogous to the Hubble telescope or now the James Webb telescope, allowing us to see further into the cosmos. And I feel AI is this sort of ultimate general purpose tool for science, allowing us to see further in many disciplines to help us better understand the universe around us and our place in it. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Demis. Perhaps the application to mathematics and theoretical physics might need a new lecture because it's really quite fascinating work there as well. Thank you so much for that. I will take a couple of quick questions, yes, and then.
I'm a huge fan and a user of AlphaFold, but you opened with wanting to get a fundamental understanding of the nature of intelligence. Help us understand how that's going to come about. I mean, you've learned how to play the games. You know how to fold a protein. What do we understand?
Yeah, great. That's a great question, Francis. And there's only so much I can speak about in 15 minutes, but actually, in a way, what I've just shown you is our applied work. I know for most people, it's probably quite funny because obviously that would be the most cutting edge fundamental research we're doing. But for us, we see things like protein folding as applying these general techniques. So you can think of the games work as pure AI research. So that was really building these fundamental learning techniques. And then now we're getting to start to apply them, generalize them to areas of science. So that's wonderful for me because that's why that's the reason I built AI. But we also we're continuing our track on fundamental AI research, and that's doing things like language modeling, language understanding. I was just talking to Stanislav earlier about this, and understanding abstractions and concepts. So that whole bunch of work is going on at pace and describing what you see in an image. Does it really understand the words that it's saying? Probably all of you have interacted now with these chatbot language systems. And there's big debates at the moment about, do they really understand what they're saying? And I think that's the part now that we're focusing on. So we're doing things like building language models and then giving them videos to watch, like on YouTube with the subtitles, and then seeing what that combined knowledge, does it then start to really ground those words in real vision and images and action? So it's a super fascinating area of research. And there's a big debate at the moment about, and I certainly a few years ago, I would have said that in order to understand the world, one has to act in it. So certainly for animals and humans, that seems to be very important. We're active participants in our own learning. So that circle I drew, the bit about the actions, effectively the agent is an active learner. Because it's actually driving the next observation it's going to get through its sensory input. But there's, what's surprising in the last few years is how far one can get just with passive observation of data, like reading the whole internet. So there's some really interesting questions there about what the nature of intelligence is and how it maybe AI will end up differing from human intelligence in the way we build it. So, and I've always felt that as a neuroscientist in me, I did my PhD in neuroscience, was to learn from the brain, get inspiration from the brain. But I think that's going to be one of the most interesting applications of AI is back to neuroscience, is actually trying to analyze neuroscience data, but also have a comparator to the human brain, a controlled, in a controlled way.
I'll have Jane and then Martin Rees after Jane.
Okay.
Really interesting. Thank you. There's so much to pursue in this. I don't know where to start, but really, really fascinating. One of the, you hinted at the very end about a number of areas that you're wanting to pursue or actively working on. And among those, you noted weather prediction and plastics. You know, short-term weather prediction is one thing, and one of the big bugaboos has been marrying the weather models with the climate model. And they're completely different types of models. They don't talk to one another. They need to be able to. So making some harmonization of those would actually be a huge breakthrough and practically really, really helpful. But could you say more about that or the plastics? I'm really curious about both of those and more, but thank you.
So yes, I totally agree with you. So in fact, the paper that we did last year was on very near-term weather prediction. So it was actually nowcasting, which is forecasting rain for a few hours ahead. And that can be quite useful for certain important things like agriculture and other things. But you're right, it's totally different from climate modeling. And what I'm actually trying to push that team into is to doing longer-term climate modeling. And what we're discussing with many of the best climate modeling institutes, and they often have very complex physical dynamic systems. And what we found is that some of our techniques are actually able to learn better models than the handcrafted ones, just directly from the data. So we would love to so we're talking to some professors at Potsdam and some of the best institutes about how we can bring learn models rather and complement the simulations they currently have. So I think that's definitely an area we should get into and the field should get into. And then on the plastic pollution stuff, that's actually, we're teaming up with University of Portsmouth, who have in the UK, have one of the best research divisions on enzymes, and they're trying to engineer enzymes to be better at eating plastics. And so I'd love to get more into that area as well. Yes, as opposed to that, but although that could be interesting too, our quantum chemistry work, which is very early stage, you know, eventually I'd love that to impact material design. So that would get more towards, you know, maybe re-engineering plastics to be better in the first place. Yeah.
Okay, the final question from Martin. Martin Rees.
Yes, Demis, what do you think are the prospects that string theory could be tested by AI working through the 10-dimensional geometry and spewing out the answer for the mass of the electron, etc., at the end in a way that no human can?
Thanks, Martin. Great to see you. Yeah, I've thought quite a lot about that, actually. And, you know, if you think of what we've built, it's in a really meta, you know, highest level terms, one could describe it as really fast guided search through this massive combinatorial space. And so one could actually map that maybe to string theory and theories like that, where, you know, it's one solution to a set of constraints. And you could imagine maybe a future AI system sort of searching through physics space and trying to find maybe, you know, either test those constraints or find different solutions to those same constraints. So I'd love to do that. There's actually an active project. I mean, it's not yet, wouldn't be able to tackle string theory yet, but there's actually a very active project that the AlphaGo team, AlphaZero team is working on at the moment on automated theorem proving, which is another classic thing in AI for a long, long time, since the dawn of AI, but we haven't really been able to make enough progress on it. And I think finally it's time now, I think we can maybe potentially solve that. So, you know, we're starting with things like Maths Olympiad problems, and then maybe eventually we'll get to things like string theory one day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very short, please, because we have 3 more speakers.
Sorry. Okay.
Thank you for your understanding. Okay, I think now I give the floor to the president for the prize.
Hi. Well, this is a very special session, as I said before. Let me read what's in the document before you. The aim of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, which was founded 1936 by the Holy Father Pius XI, is to honor pure science, wherever this may be found, to ensure its freedom, and to support the research essential for the progress of applied science. On October 28, 1961, on the occasion of the 25th anniversary of the foundation of the Pontifical Academy of Science, the Holy Father, John 23rd, established the Pius XI Gold Medal in honor of the founder of the Academy. The medal should be awarded to a young scientist who has already gained an international reputation. The Council of the Academy unanimously decided to award the Pius XI Gold Medal for the year 2020 to Professor Demis Hassabis in recognition of his great merits as a scholar and the important contribution of his research to scientific progress. Ladies and gentlemen, you were just able to listen to the contribution of Demis Hassabis to science, coming from an advanced chess player at age 13, to a game designer, to a scientist, to a globally leading entrepreneur in one of the most fascinating areas of science and technology development. There is a longer list of achievements in the document. I'd like to ask the Chancellor and the past Chancellor to walk with me for a photo session and handing over the medal.